Right, this video, hopefully fairly short, will be about hand saws in conservation work. A lot of conservation work takes place with chainsaws, but hand saws can't be discounted because in the right hands they can be very efficient, especially if you have volunteers, although you can, and I have in the past trained up volunteers to use chainsaws. Setting a nice mob of willing volunteers into an area of scrub with hand saws can yield incredibly good results. Chainsaws then go in after to do the stumping up, the boring hard work. So we're going to look at two sorts of saws: bow saws, so called because of the shape and the fact that the blade is in tension, and panel saws or hard point saws. And we're going to be talking about these, which are saw sets and the other things you need to maintain the saws. So right, I'm going to move these aside and sit down, and then we'll take you through the anatomy of a saw. Right, hard point saws are the modern version of a panel saw. Let's show you on this one because the teeth are bigger, and you can see that the teeth are blue. This is a jet cut saw, which cuts a little bit faster and in wetter wood than a standard hard point saw. And the old-fashioned panel saws had different sized teeth as well, but basically they were used to cut long cuts in timber, and you could sharpen them because the steel wasn't hard, it was tough. But the steel on these is hard, and you can tell that by the colour. So if you look at each individual one of these teeth, you'll see it is blue right the way down to the root and a little bit along the body of the saw. That basically says that it's been heat treated. In this case it's been heat treated by induction hardening. And if you look, hopefully you can see the shape of the teeth. They're like little pyramids with a flat back, and the flat back faces outwards, and the two angles of the little pyramid face inwards towards the centre line of the saw. If you turn it this way, hopefully you can see, looking down the saw, that the flat back of the pyramid on each alternate tooth basically forms a little valley, and that's the bit that does your cutting. More about that using a bow saw as an example. This one's the same, but the blue colour doesn't go all the way down to the bottom of the teeth. Do you see it? The teeth are also a different shape, so this cuts more on the push stroke than the pull stroke. And I'll tell you why the bluing of the teeth is important in a moment. But bow saws. This is a 24-inch bow saw, because of the length of the blade. It's 24 inches, 2 feet. This is another one, and this one down here, if we can pick him up, is a 21-inch bow saw. And these are especially good for cutting small stuff and coppice. And you can see the point on it. It allows you to get in between adjacent stems and cut lower down than you would be able to with that. 24-inch allows you to cut bigger stems, and there isn't a version of these that is 36 inches long, and that can cut fairly good sized trees, at least 24 inches diameter, although you have to go slower as you get towards the centre of the diameter, and that's best with 2 people, one on each end, each person pulling, not pushing, and that can work very well indeed. Let's use this one as an example. So we get rid of that one. This is a typical condition of saws that you find working for a conservation organisation. See this end here? The whole thing is slightly rusted, but this end here you can see that the steel is a yellow colour. That's an indication of the heat treatment that the whole blade has received. And if you look at the teeth, with the eye of faith you can see They are blue, or have been blue, need 3 hands for this, to about halfway down. See it there? And that tells you that the points of the teeth, like the hard point saws, is hard, but the gullets are malleable. And this allows you to compensate for issues like on this tooth here. You can see it's got a flat top, and that one there has got a flat top. You can compensate for that by using a saw set. This saw will cut as if sharp if the saw is set correctly. By setting it, I mean that if you look down the end length of the blade, you'll see that the teeth are alternately set outwards, with the flat back of the tooth to the outside. You can sharpen those, but it's a long, laborious process, and you need a needle file such as the ones in here with a flat face, and they tend to be very smooth, so it takes you a long time. And the teeth are sometimes so hard that you get nowhere. But if you use one of these devices, you can set the teeth. This makes the saw feel sharp and act sharp, because in use, because the teeth near the gullet is malleable, in use the teeth tend to get pushed in towards the centre line of the saw blade. What happens over time is that the set of the teeth decreases, and the kerf that you cut, i.e. the saw cut, it's actually called a kerf, becomes the same size as the width of the blade itself. At that point your blade tends to jam up, especially if someone in the past has bent it. It tends to jam on the bends. So the way you use your saw set is basically to push on the teeth to force them outwards. And if you use an adjustable saw set like this one, which you can pick up at car boot sales, this one was £2.50. This is an Eclipse number 27. This will set each of the teeth to the same amount. You see that little piston moving? Pushing your blade against the anvil, which on these is aluminium. Did you get it? I'll go and find my head mount and show you doing that in a moment. Here's another one in slightly less pristine condition, but works exactly the same. Here's another one, Taintor's Positive number 7 from New York, USA, probably in the years between the wars or even earlier. And you can see that you can move this centre dial exactly the same as on these ones, and rotate this and get a different size anvil with a different angle on it. And these are probably 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. number of teeth per inch. So you'd measure your inch, count the number of teeth, and then set it accordingly. You can do that on these, but with bow saws, which is what I'm going to show you, set it to the maximum. Right, I'll go and find my head mount, and then we'll actually do some setting. Right, okay, so show you this before we proceed. This is basically the remote grandfather of those, and that's basically used by hand. It relies on the skill of the user to cock, if that's the right word, each of your saw teeth is out the same amount, so basically you bend it outwards like that. And that shows the principle by which these work. So if we look down this one, you'll see, hopefully, that this is well set. This will cut even though it's lost the tops of some of the teeth, and this will feel like it's sharp. And in use, of course, all these bits of rust will come off the blade. You can take those off with a bit of wet and dry or similar. So wet and dry is a type of abrasive paper which can be used wet or dry, but if you do that, use it like that, so you're not going towards the teeth at any time. because even if they've lost their tops, they can still be sharp and you still cut yourself, which is why I'm wearing a glove on this hand, which is the hand that holds the saw. You'll see that in a moment. Let's look at the set on this one. Look down it and you can see that it is approaching the size of the kerf, the width of the blade. So got your saw set, and basically you run it down the blade on this side so that the two little flat sections face you, and you place it over the saw like that, and then you push, and then the next one, working on alternate teeth, and basically you go all the way down, remembering not to do every tooth and not to do the ones where the flat side is directly facing you. So the next one to do is that one. Then we just move down, next tooth, and you do that until you've gone down the whole of the length of the blade, like that. And if I turn this round, and this is why I'm wearing my glove, you look at the thing, this is the first one that faces away from us, so that goes on there, and then it's a case of alternate teeth. Hopefully you can now see that these teeth have been set. If you look down the blade, see these teeth here, see the little valley in it? That is greater than if you move further along. See where it changes, about where my finger is? This is a good set, and that'll cut like a demon, and it won't bind up because your kerf is now wider than the width of your blade. Got it? Right, quick word about maintaining your bow saw. Again, with glove on the left hand, face it away from you, and you can do that to remove the blade. And on this particular saw it also removes the guard, which prevents your fingers from being trapped. And the blade comes out like that, and at this end you can see this rivet here, and if the rivets are standard on a Bowsaw, which is this is, or a Sandvik, that will come almost all the way through, but won't actually fall out, and you can buy replacement rivets for this. See all the crap that came out of it? Try not to stick your saw in the ground. Where I used to work with our volunteers, we used to stress not to put your saw in the ground when you weren't using it, because that basically gums this up and damages this end and makes it even harder than usual to maintain. And to put it back in, stick it in there, and you can see, if we can get this right, that the rivet comes through. When it comes all the way through, it can't push backwards and the blade goes sproing and disappear. And on this end you can see you've got a raised tongue which goes through this groove to lock it, and then you can stick that in there, minding your fingers, and that slides down like that. Got it? And then you spring it back up, and you've got a choice of 4 settings, because in each end of the thing you've got 2 holes. That's the standard setting when it comes. slides up like that, you see. But you can see that on this saw, over time, the bow of the saw gets slack and you lose your tension in your blade. If your blade is slack, it does that in the cut and it's more likely to bind up, because your cut will cut curved and your saw will jam. So on this particular one, it goes in the second hole and you can do that. Now that's nicely tensioned, that's good. What you might find with some of these 21-inch saws is that you can't get access to this second hole because it fouls on the end here. What you can do is you can actually cut that off, because this is malleable. You can actually cut that with a hacksaw or with an angle grinder to leave the two holes, or the second of the two holes. So you cut it there, see on the edge of this first hole, swap it around, because this blade can go in either way, and that will give you an extra bit of life for your saw and your blade. So these should basically last for years. Working with conservation groups is usually starved of funds, so the best life you can get out of your tools is the best. Right, what do we forget to put on here? This jobby, which is your hand guard. Not all saws have them, but they go in there like that, and these two little pegs go on there, clicks in place, that goes there, and the handle actually holds it in position. Same way of working with these, but this is a cheap saw. You can see, although this end is exact copy of that, this end has got a bolt in it. It should have a rivet. The bolt may be soft and can break, but this is easier to sort out because this blade does not go inside the handle. Okay, but this one's well set, whistle cut. And this is an ancient Spear and Jackson, and you see it's got bolts of different sorts in both ends. Little word on teeth. This is peg teeth. It's a peg tooth blade only, and the ones on 21-inch saws are usually peg teeth blades only. Each tooth is like a peg, like a crocodile's tooth. This is a peg and raker tooth, and this blade is possibly as old as I am, which is getting on for 60. And you see you've got 4 peg teeth, and then you've got a larger gullet and a raker with 2 teeth on it. And you set these exactly as we saw before, and then to set those you dial your saw set back to about half, and then set each individual one. And you set one that way, one that way, depending on what shape they are. On some raker teeth, they're plain, so they've got no 2 little flats on either side. See a little flat and that little flat. So basically set one that way and one that way, or you can leave them alone, because their function is not primarily to cut. Their function is primarily, with these 2 large gullets, is to rake the sawdust out of the kerf, because these saws cut like that. So on each stroke, as it emerges from the lump of timber, say I'm cutting this tree, it drags the sawdust out of the cut, and again on this. Some people you see on YouTube will tell you on chainsaw sharpening videos that there are rakers on chainsaw chain. Not so. What they call rakers are actually depth gauges, and because the chain goes one way all the time, the tooth acts to clear its own sawdust. That's the cutting tooth. So those are rakers. Other bits of maintenance, basically you need a rag and some oil, and this is ordinary cheapo, this was actually from a car boot sale, cheapo oil, and all you need to do is lightly oil your rag. Then a little bit of oil on this end, a little bit of oil on that end, you can see it there, and that soaks in and stops these from rusting up. And then with the blade, you're basically working that way in a circular motion, never that way, because these teeth can be sharp, or you can do that if you're careful. But if you work like that, you get your oil on all the teeth. And the same other way around, and basically you're oiling the blade, stop it going rusty. Just here you can see where the blade is jammed and it's bent. You can't actually see the bend because it's not severe enough, but you can see this high spot here, and there might be a low spot on the other side. There isn't, but that's where it's going to bind in a cut if you haven't got it set right. So that's maintaining saws. Setting saws, if you work with volunteers, get one of these. They'll extend the life of your saw and make the saws much more pleasant to use for your volunteers if they're set correctly, or for you if you're working in your garden. Similar issues with hard point saws. Count the number of teeth, and this has also got settings on here, number of teeth per inch. This is probably about 10 or 12 teeth per inch. Dial it back so you can see the number here. You see where this 4 teeth per inch is. So it's now set on 12 teeth per inch. Move him down and you can see that each tooth goes back a lot less. You can reset this saw because the hardening does not go down into the gullet. Find the teeth that face away from you, put your jobby on like that, and then squeeze, and then do that for all of those on alternate teeth, and then come back the other way. This jack cut saw, hardening goes down into the teeth of the base of the gullet. What you might find is that you break the teeth off if you try and set them. Hope that made sense. Thank you very much.